that we know will shut in our production. We're
And
just not going to do it.
And I do understand your point about concerns when it comes to the regulatory process more generally. But I remember covering all those issues along the way.
In a showdown that had everyone talking Alberta Premier, Danielle Smith faced off against the CTV news host Vashi Kapelos in an interview that will forever be known as one of the most lopsided exchanges ever seen. The topic at hand was a sensitive one: the highly contentious emissions cap proposed by Ottawa, which was a policy that could have terrible consequences for the energy sector in Alberta and its economy. At the heart of this debate was a fundamental clash. Alberta was trying to protect its energy industry and the livelihood it supports, while Ottawa had some ambitious and, according to some people, unrealistic climate policies. Although federal leaders identify this as an important step towards tackling climate change, some critics in Alberta saw it as a direct threat to the economy of their province and a poorly planned attempt to impose a production cap on the energy sector. During the interview, Vashi Kapelos directed some questions at Danielle about the reluctance of Alberta to comply with Ottawa's emissions cap proposal. Kapelos's questions were designed to corner Smith, emphasizing the environmental stakes and framing the emissions cap as a necessary step to deal with climate change. The intention of these questions was evident to portray Smith's standing as not just risky but also irresponsible environmentally. Smith, instead of getting drawn into a defensive argument, used the questions directed at her as an opportunity to point out the flaws in the emissions cap policy. She argued that the proposal was dangerous to Alberta's economy, Canada's energy security, and Alberta's workers. She also mentioned that the proposal was impractical. Smith did not hold back as she laid out the facts. The only way to meet these aggressive targets is to cap production outright, she explained. This is not just about reducing emissions, but it is about jeopardizing Alberta's economy and putting Canada's energy security at risk. Her explanation gained more standing when she pointed out specific challenges like the long time frame required for carbon capture technologies and small modular reactor development. Vashi Kapelos seemed to be caught off guard by the depth of Smith's argument. She struggled to respond for a while, then she repeated the same points about federal commitments and climate goals. Her attempts to respond showed that she lacked a proper understanding of the energy sector in Alberta and the intricacies involved in transitioning to better technology. Smith's argument had a few key points. First of all, she emphasized the importance of small modular reactors and carbon capture storage and utilization technology in achieving proper decarbonization. She highlighted that Alberta has already stored 14 megatons of carbon dioxide using the carbon capture utilization and storage technologies CCUS. Instead of shutting down the production, she argued for investments and scaling up sub-technologies to enable a more realistic transition into a future with reduced carbon amounts. Another of her compelling points was the huge contrast between the ambitious and mission targets in Ottawa and the real-world time intervals that will be needed for regulatory approvals and project completion. She said, "These processes cannot be rushed without compromising safety consultation and practicality." Smith did not shy away from the constitutional issues at play, mentioning that Ottawa's proposal was not just impractical, but also an overestimation of professional jurisdiction. By linking production hindrances to the emissions cap, she accused the federal government of pretending and disguising a production cap to be an environmental measure. She argued that this was a direct violation of the autonomy and rights within the Canadian Federation. Kapelos's claim seemed a bit inconsistent with the intricacy of regulatory processes and energy production, which made her seem like an unprepared opponent against Smith. As the interview approached its conclusion, Danielle Smith delivered a statement that turned the course of the conversation. Her outright refusal to agree with Ottawa's emissions cap. She said, "We simply are not going to agree to any kind of arbitrary emissions cap that we know will shut in our production. We are just going to not do it." This bold declaration was not just a way of rejecting Ottawa's policy, but also it was done in defense of Alberta's economy, its industries, and its workers. Smith made it expressly clear that the livelihoods of thousands of Albertans were on the line and that she would not allow political overreach to jeopardize their future. She reinforced her commitment to protecting Alberta's interests by explaining how the emissions cap was an existential threat to Canada's energy security and also a constitutional violation and an impractical imposition. With each point she made, she solidified her stand as the leader she was unwilling to bend to unrealistic federal demands. The result of the interview made one thing clear to the audience. Danielle Smith's performance touched the viewers, especially those living in Alberta and beyond, who were of the opinion that Ottawa's policies were too unrealistic. The audience commended her style of leadership because she focused on real and achievable solutions rather than playing political games. By stressing the need for practical technologies like carbon capture and small modular reactors, Smith showed that she was not against climate actions, but she was against policies that were set to fail because of how unrealistic they were. The interview highlighted the huge difference between political posturing and leadership. While Vashi Kapelos gave the impression of a host that kept repeating herself and did not have anything tangible to say, Danielle Smith demonstrated resolve and strategic thinking that the audience loved. Her performance during the interview reminded the audience and the interviewer that leadership was more than a title. It was about standing for what was right even in the face of opposition. Do you agree with Danielle Smith's vision for Alberta's future, where practical, achievable solutions take precedence over unrealistic federal policies? Or do you believe Ottawa's approach to emissions caps and energy regulation is the way forward, despite the risks? Let us know in the comments section.